happening. We have a brand new poll out today. It shows where President Trump's job approval stands in the wake of the racial tensions, which led up to yesterday's massive counter-protest in Boston. The NBC News Mirrors poll shows President Trump's approval rating at less than 40% in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all states which helped him get elected. The poll was conducted after the deadly Charlottesville protest and President Trump's reaction to it. Jerry Falwell Jr., one of President Trump's biggest supporters in the evangelical community, says his reaction was appropriate.
He said there were very fine people on both sides. Do you believe there were very fine people on both sides? I have no idea.
He has inside information that I don't have. I don't know if there were historical purists there who were trying to preserve some statues. I don't know. But he had information I didn't have. One of the reasons I supported him is because he doesn't say what's politically correct. He says what's in his heart, what he believes. And sometimes that gets him in trouble. But he does not have a racist bone in his body. I know him well.
Now, Jerry Falwell Jr.'s comments come at a time when a small group of Liberty University alumni are reportedly returning their diplomas to protest his support for President Trump. Meanwhile, some Republican lawmakers are standing by their rebuke of the president after he compared the counter-protesters in Charlottesville to white nationalists.
It's all Jake about people getting to him and explaining to him we've got to bring the country together. And, you know, blaming one side or another when we're talking about the KKK or white supremacists, there is no comparison between these hate groups and everybody else.
If the president wants to have a better understanding and appreciation for what he should do next, he needs to hear something from folks who have gone through this painful history. Without that personal connection to the painful past, it will be hard for him to regain that moral authority from my perspective.
Over the last 7 months, there's been ample opportunity to disagree with the president on many issues. And, you know, this is not a time for us to be afraid of being tweeted. You know, this is not a time for us to suppress our convictions.
Also, new reaction from former Obama Homeland Security Advisor Jay Johnson, making the argument to remove Confederate monuments on the grounds of public safety.
So many of the statues, the Confederate monuments, are now modern day becoming symbols and rallying points for white nationalism, for neo-Nazis, for the KKK. And this is most alarming. We fought a world war against Nazism. The KKK rained terror on African Americans for generations. And I salute those in cities and states who are taking down a lot of these monuments for reasons of public safety and security.
Let's go now to Bridgewater, New Jersey. That's where my colleague Kelly O'Donnell is the very latest from the northern White House, shall we say, the New Jersey White House. Kelly, with a welcome to you. There's some new reaction today to Steve Bannon's exit from the White House. Tell us about that.
Well, this is a big departure for the president's inner circle. We saw it play out on Friday. A person who had been the CEO of the campaign and then a chief strategist inside the White House, and someone who is very closely allied to the populist impulses of the president and is viewed by his critics as being a megaphone for the alt-right. And now Steve Bannon is back at Breitbart News, where he says he will use the power of that platform to fight against the opponents of President Trump. And some of those may even be allies inside the White House who were once his former colleagues, and they just see the world differently. Well, this kind of a big change at the top is certainly going to draw interest from people who are wanting to see the president sort of move forward in a more positive way. So if you look at Ohio Governor John Kasich, who has often been a critic of the president, but at the same time wants him to be successful in terms of for the good of the country, here is the prescription from Ohio Governor John Kasich on what John Kelly, the chief of staff, needs to do with respect to getting things organized inside the White House team.
They've got to get some stability among the staff, and I think that's probably what General Kelly is trying to do with so many changes here in the last couple weeks. But the changes have to stop, and we have to have a team. You can't keep putting new people in the lineup and think you're going to win a world championship.
And it is unclear, based on our reporting, if there will be additional staff changes in the days to come. John Kelly has been doing an assessment of the team, and certainly to remove a figure as large as Steve Bannon with as big a shadow and his own power base inside the White House, it is thought that there could be some additional staff changes. John Kasich is saying, let's get the team set and then try to move forward with very limited time legislatively for the president. When everyone is back in Washington for September, there are some big-ticket must-do items like raising the debt limit and passing appropriations. And the president needs to have some stability in order to try to get that done. Alex?
All right, Kelly O'Donnell, thank you so much from New Jersey for us. We appreciate that. Let's get more now on the day's top political headlines. To do that, we bring in Bruce LaValle, Executive Director of the National Diversity Coalition for the President. Bruce, welcome back to the broadcast.
Welcome, Alex. Welcome in Atlanta. Happy Sunday.
Well, good. I'm glad you're doing well there in Atlanta. Let's talk about Steve Bannon's departure from the White House. A concession by the president to the GOP establishment, Steve? Do you see it that way? Is this any sign that he's moving away from the far right?
No, I don't see that, and thanks for having me. I think, I can judge, Steve Bannon based because I know him. I see a lot of guests on various shows try to articulate him that don't know him. And I will tell you, during the campaign, he was a catalyst in terms of helping the National Diversity Coalition, which is ndctrump.com, in terms of how we are able to engage our voter outreach in terms of our African-American vote, Hispanic vote, which you know as well as I do was historically high since Richard Nixon and climbing. And I will say this, regardless of what anyone says, based on my personal experience, at the Trump Towers and working with him and Kellyanne Conway, I never seen any of this particular, person that this mainstream media is trying to make him out to be. And honestly, if it really wasn't for him, I don't think we would have been as successful with the coalition with Pastor Scott and Michael Cohen as we went through the campaign. So I'm judging it based on what I seen, Alex, and what I had exposure to with Steve Bannon.
Okay, and I understand that, but Bruce, then how do you interpret the fact that Steve Bannon says now we are going to go to war? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think respectfully, with respect to all, most media, it's been a little unfavorable for the president in terms of, giving him an ability to be successful. So I look at it as competition being healthy. And for me, no matter what organization you're with, I'm praying for true journalism to come back to the American people. So I think it's essential that we get more, should I say, healthy dialogue and competition from other news affiliates that can really articulate the president's success. As you know as well as I do, not like your show, Alex, there have been some unfavorable shows that will not, under no circumstances, allow this president to be successful.
Well, I will say we do try in this show to present both sides and let people make their decisions for themselves. But let's talk about the exit interview in which Bannon said that the Trump presidency that we fought for and won is over. So how do you interpret that, Bruce?
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking about this and I noticed, like, from the terms of the Obama administration, the Bush administration, unfortunately, some of us have short memories. It's not uncommon for, staff to make transitions in those first several months because, granted now, in terms of coming from a private sector to work in a public sector, it's not easy. But I look at it as a season. I look at it as a 4x100 relay where you run the baton and pass it to the next person, just like we did through the campaign, et cetera. So I'm very optimistic. Mr. Bannon and the president are still on great terms, just like anyone else that has left the administration and still want to serve the people. Because, Alex, at the end of the day, our whole common goal is to try to help the American people, and that's who elected President Trump.
There are a lot of people, though, and I'm sure you've heard it, Bruce, saying that Steve Bannon is more dangerous to the president outside the White House than in it, because now he's got a lot more money at hand. He has virtually zero restrictions. So should the president be at all worried about what comes from Steve Bannon going forward? Might there be a crossing of ideology there?
No, once again, like I said previously, that I see a lot of people trying to articulate everyone when they don't really know the person. And I can say, based on my personal experience and what I've witnessed, that I don't see any, should I say, ill will between, Mr. Bannon and the president. I think everyone has such a deep passion with a desire to help the American people, and sometimes passions ooze stronger than others, and it's not conducive for the team at the present time. So therefore, we make transitions, and people move in, people move out. But I don't see that based on my personal experience and what I've seen whatsoever. So I'm totally confident is the answer to this, Alex, basically.
But Bruce, then when you look at Steve Bannon and you look at Breitbart News, an organization that he's founded and he has returned to as the chairman of, you look at the words that are emanating, the stories, the perspectives, all of that to the far right and beyond sometimes. Do you not think that Steve Bannon should be held responsible for that as the head of that organization? You don't think that reflects what's in his heart?
No, I think with respect to other news affiliates, I mean, look how unfair the president's been treating. I mean, my God, Alex, I go on certain shows and it's usually me 1 against 5, and it becomes over talking me and suppressing my voice and where I stand from, which I've always said this is another form of voter suppression, is to suppress people who look like me across the country and name call and mock, which I will never it will never bother me, because I understand that everyone's passions runs deeper than others. So I'm extremely optimistic in terms of, especially with the consumer confidence the president's put on the nation, ability to run a business. And there's a few kinks in every administration, respectfully, but I am very optimistic with our job growth, 1 million jobs in our African-American community. I'm right here right down the street from historically Auburn Avenue, right here as we speak, with a growth of 175,000 jobs to the African-American community. A great national Betsy DeVos, who's going to come in and propose new ideas in terms of school choice that affects a lot of the African American community. So there's so much in terms of optimism, especially the tax reform that's going to come after Labor Day, that's going to affect all Americans, especially small businesses like myself. So
I have to say, I appreciate your optimism on that. Tax reform, getting that through Congress is going to be pushing a boulder up a hill. That said, Bruce, I do have a question in terms of your position as chair of the President's Diversity Coalition. What did you think of the president's statements on Charlottesville? Was it fair or accurate to blame both sides for the violence?
Well, this is what I saw from the first time he addressed it. I was watching the interview just like everyone else, and based on my experience traveling and knowing the president, and being in close proxemics and traveling with him and spending time with him, with a lot of our pastors in the past, with strategic groups in terms of what can we do to help the country. I could see he was genuinely hurt about those Trooper McCullen and Trooper Bates losing their lives and Miss Heyer losing her life. He was genuinely upset and just basically blanketed like hate, was very disappointed in all groups. But with all due respect to the viewers and the country, you got to remember it was so early, it was so quick. And we've known from other previous presidents or any leaders that jump out too quick to not really understand what the ground game is. But there's one thing that I really admire about the president is putting Attorney General Sessions stepping up very quick and jumping out there immediately and putting a DOJ ground game out there in terms of finding out what is going on out here, unlike previous administrations that kicked the can and waited a while. And my God, look at Ferguson. It almost burnt to the ground, bless their hearts, until finally the DOJ stepped in. So, I'm very optimistic, and especially, Alex, too, when this investigation comes out, we're going to find out more what really went on.
Okay. Bruce LaBelle, thank you so much for your time, as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next, Congressman Andre Carson joins me to explain why he's one of several lawmakers calling on the president to fire members of his staff who have one particular characteristic in common.
The President of the United States can't bring himself to repudiate a part of his support, and that is that small group of bigots that are supporters of his. He's taken a position essentially that if you're with me, you can do no wrong.
House Intelligence Committee member Democrat Adam Schiff joining the chorus of politicians on both the left and right, criticizing President Trump's response to the Charlottesville protests last weekend. Let's bring in Indiana Congressman Democrat Andre Carson. Sir, with a welcome to you. I know that you are co-sponsoring a resolution calling on Mr. Trump to fire supporters of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. First of all, logistically, how do you propose the president go about doing that?
Well, thank you for having me on. You know, I think it's clear. On his campaign, he promoted himself and purported himself to be a very bold and decisive leader who's able to make changes on the spot and decisions on the spot. And when he sees someone who is ineffective or disruptive to his organizational process, he'll get rid of them. But he has failed to do so. What he has done is he has effectively created an echo chamber in which folks who agree philosophically and who are ideologues can reaffirm one another's decisions.
There may be arguments on this that initiatives like this threaten the constitutional rights of people with whom you don't agree. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think having white supremacist sympathizers in your administration should not be something that should be accepted or acceptable to any White House or any presidency, at least in the 21st century. What I think is clear is that the presidency is unraveling before our eyes. And in a very sad way, but a real way, voters are getting an education about what it means to participate in the political process. Look, folks may not like politicians, but the facts are clear. If you want to impact change in a meaningful way, you must vote, and you must be politically engaged by holding those you vote for accountable. And Donald Trump has courted the alt-right. He's blown kisses. He's tiptoed through the tulips with them. And now his presidency is unraveling because he has refused to be decisive and definitive in his repudiation of these terrible organizations.
Let's take a listen to what Republican Governor John Kasich said a bit earlier today about this debate. Here it is.
If all we're doing is questioning his motives and what's in his heart, and the right and the left, all we're doing is fighting and yelling back and forth, Jake, you're all asking the question, how does the country make it with all this fighting? This is ridiculous at this point.
It seems like all the public hears is a lot of yelling on both sides. Does the governor have a point?
I've always found Governor Kasich to be pretty measured in his views. However, I think it's unfortunate when you have groups of people who have historically been discriminated against. Once they start speaking out very boldly and saying enough is enough, then they're condemned. I mean, these are traits of a narcissistic abuser, if you will. But I think it's important that we now focus on 2018 and the implications there. We still have a legislative branch that has to work together in a bipartisan fashion to get things done for the American people. You would think that President Trump, who is a developer, would focus on issues that impact Americans, investment in infrastructure, job creation. What does he want to do? He wants to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, thus taking away insurance coverage from tens of millions of Americans. These are misplaced priorities.
I'm curious if you have an idea on how to combat these domestic terror groups. I know that the Trump administration, DHS advisor Catherine Gorka has been behind a plan to defund Life After Hate, that group that works to de-radicalize neo-Nazis. Are Democrats doing anything to help groups like these?
Well, as someone who was a former police officer, I worked with the Indiana Department of Homeland Security and counterterrorism and counterintelligence. It's critically important. You know, I've said before, to much controversy, that white supremacist organizations are the largest threat to our internal security. I think that there are organizations out there who are seeking to use kind of a deprogramming attempt or process to get these folks away from these hurtful ideologies, much like was done in the 60s and 70s with so-called cults.
All right, Indiana. So have you heard there's a total solar eclipse coming in about 24 hours your way if you're in the path of totality? NBC's Mariana Atencio is joining me from one of those areas, Carbondale, Illinois. So let's talk about what's going on out there today and how excited everyone is.
Alex, you can just sense the excitement. This town is being dubbed the solar eclipse crossroads of America, and they are prepared. This stadium behind me, it will pack 15,000 people tomorrow. The mayor has closed down schools to make more parking available. Churches are being transformed into cooling centers because it is pretty warm out here. And just behind me here, you also see a traveling carnival in town specifically for the eclipse. Carbondale, Illinois, it is estimated that its economy will gain almost $20 million because of the solar eclipse. And there's another reason it's being called the solar eclipse crossroads of America. They're going to get another total solar eclipse in 7 years. So they're telling me this is a rehearsal for them.
Okay,
Alex?
well, stake your tent for the future as well, Mariana. Thank you so much for Carbondale. That's going to do it for me this hour. I'm Alex Witt. Thanks so much for watching. Coming right at the top of the hour, I'll speak with Congressman Keith Ellison about the events in Charlottesville and Boston. But first, Velshine Rule on the CEOs who quit the president's business advisory councils. Coming up next.
CEOs make a mass exodus from President Trump's advisory councils after his reaction to events in Charlottesville put them in the crosshairs of angry consumers and employees. And gender inequality in Silicon Valley, from wages to fundraising to harassment, can any of it be fixed? This is a special edition of Velshine Rule. Hey folks, I'm Ali Velshi. Stephanie is off, which makes me sad, but it's a special week indeed because I'm excited to be joined by executive editor of Recode and the host of Recode Decode podcast, Kara Swisher. Great to have you here. Thank you for being with us.
So nice to be here on the television.
It's great to have you here, and it's a perfect week to have you here because the news out of Charlottesville has exploded in so many ways, so many things that we cover. The shrapnel is reaching Silicon Valley and CEOs around the country. So let's start with the CEOs and their reaction to everything that's happened in the last week. This week, the businessman president, the deal maker president, lost the businessmen and women advising his administration. All of them, every single one who signed up to be on President Trump's 2 business councils are gone. It all started with this man, Merck CEO Kenneth Frazier. He stepped down from the Manufacturing Jobs Initiative Council, a panel of business leaders advising the White House after President Trump did not denounce white supremacy by name in response to last week's violent attacks in Charlottesville, Virginia. Now, Frazier was like the boy who told the emperor that he has no clothes. Somebody had to be first, but after that, it came apart fast.
Well, it was already coming apart. Elon Musk had left over the climate issues. Travis Kalanick from Uber had left over the immigration issues. So it's not something that hadn't started, and I think they were all a little nervous, and then they ran for their private planes as fast as they could go. You know what I mean?
And Frazier was followed by 10 more CEOs leaving the Manufacturing Council before the president actually then got on top of this thing and said, look, my one council, the CEOs all agreed. He jumped.
Listen,
he jumped the shark on Twitter.
It's like breaking up with someone. I'm breaking up with you. So you say, oh, no, I really wanted to break up with you. This is not what they wanted to happen at the White House. They've been trying very hard, especially Jared Kushner, to try to corral all these CEOs, especially tech CEOs and different people about the future and jobs. And these people just don't want to be there.
So what was it? Is it that they're embarrassed to be with the president? Is it that they don't think their agenda, the things that they signed up to be on these committees, are getting done? Is it because these councils are just photo ops? What's the thing? What drove them?
Well, I call them photo ops. They are certainly, but there is a thing to being close to the president and having his ear and giving advice and things like that. And I think they're good photo ops for these companies. But now it's not a good photo op. They look, they look like that they're endorsing this kind of behavior. And I don't want to do that for lots of reasons. A lot of them having to do with their employees, some of them having to do with the public perception.
Well, let's talk about the employees. We have more than a quarter of our workforce now is millennials, who studies have showed have different priorities about what they want out of their workplace. In my generation, it's still mostly about money and title. But to these employees, it's about the work culture and the company they work for.
Well, they have a lot more power. I mean, tech is just one example of that because there's not enough people in tech, and they've got hundreds of thousands of jobs are open. And so people who run tech companies have to think very hard about their employees and what makes them happy. And it goes from everything to giving them like kombucha shakes at Google to really walking the talk on a lot of social issues, and not just social issues, immigration, climate change, and this is just, it's not, I don't want to say it's a final straw, but it is. It's like it's enough.
And it costs a lot of money. It costs money to train these people because there's a shortage. You have to pay them a good amount of money. And a study indicates that the cost of millennial turnover, meaning losing these people to other jobs, is $30 billion. If you're a tech company that is having a hard time getting workers, you're not interested in losing them for the wrong reasons.
Well, you're also there for different reasons than just the job. It is, the workplace is changing. We all know that. And so, and especially at the very top of the workplace, which this is. And so you really have to, I always think of like that everyone has a base. Trump has a base. These tech CEOs and all the CEOs have a base.
The workers are the base.
The workers are the base.
All right, well, Silicon Valley did respond in another way to President Trump's lack of response or poor response to Charlottesville. Airbnb suspended accounts of people who attended the rallies in Charlottesville and rented houses in the area. GoDaddy kicked the alt-right site called the Daily Stormer off its servers. Now, they then said, we're going to go to Google. Google
kicked them off.
Kicked them off as well.
Everybody did.
Everybody kicked them off. A lot of these alt-right white supremacist Twitter users were banned from the social media platform. Some of them, that had started in the 2016 election. But not all tech companies are coming down equally hard.
No, I mean, I think it was interesting. Yeah, they jumped from one site to the other, and then I think they're to Russia, and Russia kicked them off. So that's how bad it is, right? The Russians couldn't even take them. I think in terms of what's happening here is a lot of these companies are getting a lot of pressure from users and their employees again, and they don't want to be part of this. They don't want to be affiliated with them. It's a very, I think it is an easy choice for a lot of them because it looks like hate speech, it looks like harassment, and they can make that as excuses because in their terms of service, they have those things. Now, other companies like Facebook and Twitter, they have a broader problem in that they are open platforms for people to express themselves, and so where's the line between free speech and hate speech and between abuse and everything else? And you know, it's a huge and difficult issue that is hard to navigate, but at the end of the day, these are their companies, these are their products, and they can decide on their own if they want to be part of it.
This is the world you operate a lot in, and there's a larger argument out there that says while there might be some regulation necessary, most of Silicon Valley doesn't want anybody else regulating it. They want to be able to make their own rules, and some of these companies say that the internet is a utility. It's the same as electricity and water coming into a house. So somebody may not be using their water well, or you may not like their opinions, but you don't cut their power. Does that?
No, it's not a utility. I get that. It's from like EFF and ACLU and all stuff. I get the idea behind it, but no, these are companies that are here to make money, and they're very wealthy. I don't know in case you noticed, but they're among the richest people in the world, and they can make their own determination. And I think that's what people don't realize. Even though they are a necessary product that people need to have every day, they are controlled by these giant technology companies that have a lot of power.
So we've got the problem with companies that don't want to upset their employees or shareholders or customers or whomever, but there's this other debate that internet companies and other companies are involved in, and it's the ongoing, ever-standing debate about free speech. Now, you remember the story, we covered it here, about Google firing the engineer James Damore after his infamous memo on gender went viral. The more than 60 current and former female Google employees said that they're joining a class action lawsuit about pay inequity. Now, this suit would build on a case that's been brought by the U.S. Department of Labor, which alleges systematic compensation discrimination at the tech giant. Kara, in the middle of this, there are still many people who don't believe that gender discrimination actually exists. So, for fact's sake, we asked that question. Is there really a gender pay gap? By now, you've probably heard of the gender pay gap, and when you look at the statistics, there's no denying it. In 2015, women working full-time in the United States were paid 80 cents on the dollar compared to what men were paid. And that 20 cents difference adds up, making median annual earnings for men over $10,000 more than they are for women. These are the figures that were cited often by the Obama White House, but many conservative think tanks took issue with the assumptions made, choosing to tweak the variables that narrow the gap to 87 cents on the dollar or 95 cents. Well, despite the differing estimates of what the gender pay gap is, most people can agree on this. There is a gender pay gap. Some argue that choices in education or occupation are what result in women receiving lower pay. It is true that women are concentrated in lower paying occupations like healthcare, education, and office or administrative support. And statistically speaking, women are more likely to work fewer paid hours, splitting their time between childcare, housework, and a full or part-time position. But comparing apples to apples, women and men with the same levels of education continue to receive unequal pay. Male software developers, truck drivers, registered nurses, designers, food service managers all get paid more than women do. Female financial managers make on average 35% less than their male coworkers. Even so, many still argue that women have made great progress because the gender pay gap has narrowed narrowed so much since 1960, but that progress has slowed in the last 15 years. And in this day and age, why should women with the same education, experience, and job description be earning any less than men? Narrowing the gender pay gap is so important because more women today are the sole breadwinners for their families than ever before, meaning all of us are held back when wages continue to be unequal. So you deal with this a lot. You see this a lot in the world in which you exist.
Yeah.
What's your sense of, is there progress being made?
I think they're trying. We interviewed Ruth Porat, who's the CFO of Google, on stage this year at our Code conference, and obviously they're trying to rectify it. But the fact of the matter is, there's a pay gap, and there are all kinds of reasons for it, because about negotiating, about who's hiring whom, and just general bias that sort of seeps in the system. Even if it's, they use the word unconscious, I think it's fully conscious. But I think one of the issues is we've got to, equal pay for equal work is what you want to talk about. There are women are clustered in lower paying jobs, but at the same time, if you're doing exactly the same work, you should be paid exactly the same thing.
Right, and do you think that, generally speaking, this lawsuit that we mentioned notwithstanding, are Silicon Valley companies or tech companies trying to deal with this?
I think they put a lot of lip service to it. I mean, what they do is they go around and say we're a meritocracy. That's their favorite thing. And I always call it a mirrortocracy. You know what I mean? They hire people that are like themselves, which is white men. And the statistics just bear it out: 70%, 80%, 90% in technical jobs, which is where the real money is. And so they create these situations where they talk one way, and then the result is pretty bad. And it's pretty bad compared to the workplace around the United States too. Like, tech has a real problem in this area, and they've got to. The CEOs have just got to make it the priority to fix it.
And they are, at the same time, struggling with the idea that some of the main jobs in Silicon Valley, software engineers, there just aren't as many women even graduating in those areas, and they're certainly not joining at that rate.
I think it's because of it's a number of things. It's the atmosphere they create and what kind of work environment it is. It's the way people hire. It's the way people like to pattern map on each other. There's all kinds of things at work, and you don't want to, immediately blame people, but the result is a result. And every single tech company, if you look at all their diversity reports, are just the same. And what's fascinating is just as many studies show that a diverse workforce is a more profitable workforce, a better workforce, creates more creativity and more innovation, which is what we need in this country.
All right, so that's on the salary side of things, but there's another side to this, particularly in tech. Women are getting less money to launch new tech startups. Now, the reasons, just like this, are more complicated than you might think. Is it because investors just aren't asking the right questions? We're going to talk about that when we come back with my special guest, Kara Swisher. Stay with us. Velshi and Rule is back after the break.
Morning Joe speaks truth to power.
This is how a guilty person acts.
He's shattering the hopes of the people who voted for him.
With access to the people who
of Recode is my partner for this week. Thank you for being with us.
Can I do my arms like she does?
The serious Stephanie Rule look?
Or this one.
That's good. We don't do that in real life, right? It's just for the pictures. Kara is a Silicon Valley expert, and we're talking a lot about women and their situation in the workforce, but particularly in Silicon Valley. We've talked a lot about this bro culture that's come under fire because it manifests sometimes in sexual harassment and gender discrimination in the workplace, but it's more than that. Critics say the male-dominated tech world makes it harder for women to actually raise the money that's needed when they want to start and grow new businesses. In fact, there's a new report that actually documents how few women get the fraction of the venture capital funding when you compare them to men. And this report says that women's share of funding is not actually growing. Believe it or not, it's shrinking. If you want to start a business, you need cash. More often than not, that cash comes from venture capitalists. But it's a well-documented fact that most of this money is given to companies run by men. And the numbers back it up. It's bad. In 2016, venture capitalists invested $58.2 billion in companies with all-male founders. They invested just $1.5 billion in companies founded by women. That means women got just 2.2% of the funding being handed out. And it gets worse. On average, companies run by women get about $4.5 million each. That's actually down from $6.1 million in 2015 and $5.1 million in 2014. So what's the problem?
There is a pattern recognition about who should get that capital. And that pattern recognition is, especially in Silicon Valley, is much more a male entrepreneur.
Kay Koplovitz is partner at Springboard Growth Capital. For the last 18 years, she's helped secure $7.8 billion of funding for nearly 700 women-led companies. She said gender bias still exists because the overwhelming majority of venture capitalists are men, and they approach male entrepreneurs differently.
Men will pitch in a certain way and be asked certain kinds of questions, future questions, projection questions. The same business presented by a woman will be asked questions like, how much of your marketplace did you capture in, so far last year? What is your results of what you've done? It's a retrospective looking.
Koplovitz says female business leaders may also head up companies that appeal more to women, making it harder for male venture capitalists to relate. And women may just have a harder time getting male investors to trust them.
They want to back you because they think they're going to make a good deal of money backing you. And you've got to convince them that you understand that and that you will deliver it.
But there could be an even bigger problem. Fewer female leaders of companies are competing for the cash. Only 17% of companies funded by venture capital have a female co-founder or CEO, 17%. And only 3.9% of funded companies are entirely run by women. So what's the solution? That is truly the million-dollar question. And that's truly the million-dollar question I'm going to put to Kara.
Yeah.
This is definitely a problem in need of fixing. Yeah. What do you think the best fix is to get more women wanting to run these businesses, wanting to start them because they believe they will actually get the money to start their businesses up?
I think ultimately it has to change what is an entrepreneurial culture. I think the way it's been built, it sort of gives advantage to certain qualities, right? And there are differences between men and women and how they approach the workplace. Not everybody, and everyone doesn't fit into something. I think the issue is, one, most venture capitalists are men, and they're men of a certain age, and they just are more comfortable, pattern mapping.
Right. We out on the East Coast think that everybody on the West Coast is so forward-thinking and new and fantastic. But some of them are actually the retired bankers that used to be out here.
There's a lot of khaki wearing out there, with like comfortable shoes. But that doesn't mean you're going to get the kind of ideas generation that, if you're very comfortable with a Mark Zuckerberg, you're going to invest in the person who looks like him. And I know that sounds simplistic, but it really is. And there's a really weird meme out there, if only there was a Marsha Zuckerberg who was as successful, which is kind of strange on the face of it, but they just can't imagine or feel comfortable doing these fundings. And so the same thing with boards. And that's where there's tons of women who are highly qualified to be on boards. But the Twitter board at one point had 10 men, I think all white men of the same, that just doesn't happen.
Right, well, Stephanie and I talk about this all the time. There are companies whose audience, whose customers are mostly women, not even in tech, and there are very few women on those boards. So the decision-making at every level needs to change.
Boards are really where you can find those, there's tons and tons of qualified women to be on boards, and there's, binders of women, as they say, but it's really fascinating that they don't get on. So therefore, it's a choice, and it shouldn't be women that have to press women forward. It should be men that should be championing them too. And I think that's a mentality that has to change.
So we appreciate that people like Kay are out there and doing that.
100%,
but that's definitely an ethos that we need to change. All right, coming up, the Tech Roadshow hitting 50 cities across America. Carol was actually there. We're going to have more on that when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching Velshi and Rule. Velshi and Swisher for the moment.
Be a global citizen.
For freedom.
For justice.
For all. It's a high-tech roadshow in search of new talent to fill America's growing knowledge-based jobs pool. The Tech Jobs Tour is described as a career fair meets a revival. It aims to fill 500,000 openings posted by U.S. tech firms. The tour is going to hit 50 cities this year. Kara, earlier in the week when I tried to get you to talk about these jobs councils falling apart, you texted me from West Virginia.
Yes, I was in West Virginia, and then I was in Kentucky, where it was going. It's called hashtag America is Hiring. And I think the idea, it's a thing called here sourcing, is that there's all this outsourcing we discuss it, and jobs are going. And so they're going to all these cities across the country, including San Francisco, by the way, lots of places, and trying to find more people to fill these jobs. These are high-paying jobs. They iterate through the economy. One job represents 5 jobs. The taxpayer
because somebody gets a good salary, so they need other support services.
And so I wanted to go to West Virginia. My family's from West Virginia, actually, part of my family, and to see, because this has been sort of the flashpoint of the Trump administration talking about returning coal miners. And I think what's interesting is here we have a perfect example. This was a region that relied on one industry that is not going to be part of the future necessarily. I mean, they're trying very hard to revive parts of it, but really they have
fundamentally,
they need to diversify their economy at the very least, even if coal continues. And so this is an idea of going in and making clear that these people are talented, they have the ability, they need to be educated, they need to be linked up and networked with other people so that we can, you know, provide jobs to as many people as possible.
And what is that? I mean, are we talking about people who were co-workers or manufacturing workers, blue-collar workers becoming software engineers or coders?
There's all kinds of jobs hanging off of tech. You don't think of tech as just coding. There's all kinds. There's marketing people, there's sales people, there's all kinds of things. And I think what's interesting is getting the idea that these people can know that they are talented enough to do it. There's nothing special about Silicon Valley people. There isn't. They just happen to do computer science in school, and they have certain qualities that make them more entrepreneurial. But anybody can be an entrepreneur, and it can be taught. And you can, if you start to think of yourself that way, that's what's great. And we did a podcast with a bunch of people who had gone to school, and they're trying new things, and they've got to do that. They've got to figure out, and for their children alone, and in education and stuff. So it's a really important initiative, especially because a lot of these tech companies do want to hire